welcome back to the Nora Seroussi Show. Now, this week we're doing things a little different, and I will explain to you why. Because I'm sure you've all seen the news of what's going on in America, and now has hit the rest of the world. So I decided I wanted to do a show, and I was thinking, who is the person that I know that can do this kind of a conversation with me? And the only person I could think of, actually, realistically, was Princess Leia, who I'd like to say thank you and welcome, and I appreciate your coming.
It's always a pleasure, but today is an honor. This is the third time I've been on your show, and this is a departure, but it's so topical, so bravo to you.
Thank you. You know, I've been watching everything that's going on with George Floyd, with Ahmaud Arbery, there's been so much happening in America. And I've talked to different people here. And it's people are aware of it, some are not so aware of it. We haven't had any demonstrations or anything here.
Correct.
And we don't have, I think, the kind of racism that they have in America, to be honest, okay? Because I have lived in different places and I have seen different things. And now we're not talking just about racism, because now it's gone to Australia with the Aborigines. It's the whole world is like had an awakening. Now, I'm going to give you my theory, and then I want to hear if you maybe have a different theory. Because there's COVID. Everybody's been locked up. Everybody has many people have lost their jobs, millions, okay? Let's say in America, it's, I think, almost 20% of the population. And then you see somebody killed in front of you, basically, with the knee on the neck.
Such a tragedy.
The knee on the neck.
Yes.
And I think it just exploded, and everybody just they had enough. And even, especially now with COVID, social distancing, all of that, it doesn't matter. They were just, it was like, that's it, because they've gone through it month after month after month. And I think all of these were contributing factors. What do you think set it off?
The fact that you're saying that the COVID-19 was, it's not, many times you'll have people say that, oh, the planets were aligned. If you're going to use that analogy, the planets crashed together. To have coronavirus before this particular tragedy was the most unfortunate for all sides, because you have a global population that is with trepidation about what tomorrow will bring, not just the virus, but the unknown factors. Is it a man-made conspiracy? Is it a escaped virus from the tear in the refrigerator in a virology lab in Wuhan? Or is it the first theory, which is now being shelved, saying no, it is not the bats, it's not the Leander, where in the wet markets these were animals that were being sold. The question is, people are not knowing if they're safe, let alone if they're going to be able to pay their bills. There is a huge nobility right now of remembering who our heroes are: the health keepers, the ambulance staff, the takeout delivery people, the garbage men and women,
the teachers,
everyone
Everybody
that is dealing with,
we have to appreciate
taking care in a more common sense way. This is unheard of in our lifetime. I mean, we've had riots. I was in Washington when my parents had been with the administration in Washington when it was Dr. Martin Luther King.
Wow.
And I had a terrific summer job, and that was at the Washington Hilton. Well, we had a lockdown because of the raiding and the looting. But what is interesting is that this former room clerk later became on the board of governors of the Dr. Martin Luther King Center and Library. And what I feel honored to be here is that I have lived in both extremes. I have credentials from the liberal side, having worked in the Carter White House, who was very much a man who practiced what he believed and preached, and was probably the most honorable person in modern history that served his country in the White House. But also being on the Dr. Martin Luther King, also having brought Archbishop Desmond Tutu to the United States.
I wanted to ask you about that because I actually was looking at the pictures earlier.
Yes, yes.
And I saw pictures of you with him. And I said, I want to mention all of this and bring it up after, because you've met people that most of us will ever only read about, you know?
But also seeing the underbelly of racism when a white woman, my family let me, loaned me out to help. It was actually George Bush Sr. who had approached me to ask, we want to have Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He's refused us. And just so you know, your friend Tom Bradley, the black mayor of L.A.,
yeah.
he was turned down also.
Really? I didn't know that.
And
okay,
can you go to Cape Town and convince him to come, or at least find out what the problem is? This was after the Nobel Peace Prize. Mandela is in prison. And what our scope was going to be is to put sophisticated pressure on the Congress in the United States to do something.
Okay, and I have to interrupt you. How, first of all, I want to know, how did you feel when they came and asked you, after he was turned down by, Bradley was turned down, everybody. That was, number one, I think an honor, and how did you get to that position, and how did you feel?
Can't say no to a challenge. But admiring him so much, and admiring George Bush Sr., the issue is that I'm always, remember, I'm Romanian blood.
I know that.
100%. And I've learned that diplomacy from a lady who has been in the trenches, it's very hard to say no to me. Because if you say no, then I'll find another way.
I can, excuse me, I can vouch for that.
All right.
I can vouch for that because you are so charming and you're so eloquent. And it's very true, very hard to say no to anything you need. Sorry,
so on the liberal side, I've participated in marches when I was president of the largest grassroots political organization in the United States, California Democratic Council. And what I saw is the passion, the hurt, the fear of people who truly don't want their children to go through the sufferings that they have been. But the other demonstrations that are different that you and I have lived through, and the majority of your army of admirers who are in your audience, is that on one hand we see that what is happening right now with the Floyd movement awakening globally has
I think that's a perfect word.
Yeah, has simply not happened. With the Rodney King, that was America. I don't remember, other than Great Britain, a movement. Me
Too.
I'm
going to interrupt you for a second. I don't know if you know, I was living in L.A. when that happened. And I have to tell you, I will never, it's like, somebody wrote an article the other day about the smell, the burning, and the black sky, and I remember it so well. I was in downtown LA, which I was usually never in downtown LA, and in those days we did not have mobiles, and I was listening to my radio, driving along happily. Had I stayed another couple hours, God knows what would have happened. And by the time I got home, my sister was calling hysterical to say, have you seen what's going on? And I'm like, no, I have no idea what's going on. They literally, and you know what the big mistake, in my opinion, at that time, and not that I'm involved in any politics or anything, they could have you could have predicted that if there was all right, so what happened? There was an African-American gentleman that was beaten by police officers, caught on tape, and that was the trial, and they declared they were not guilty. And all heck broke loose. The National Guard was then called. We were under curfew. There was looting. There was burning. The sky was black.
But looting in the black neighborhoods.
In the black area. And then they said, okay, let's
Explain
go.
that.
Because it was just like a fury. Then the movement, the people started coming. They said, we're going to go to Beverly Hills and we're going to go to Westwood. And, you know, it was so intense you could feel it, and everybody was just in a rage. And it was, because it's exactly, but you know, this was 28 years ago, Leah. And now I saw it 3 weeks ago again, and you know what? Your heart breaks because you're thinking, my God, are we never going to learn? Are we never, it's been going on, how many, I yesterday read about 2 other cases that are now coming into the public view. Okay, so I called this show, we talked about it, to demonstrate or not to demonstrate. It's a personal choice. Yes. You have to be very careful, because I have my best friend and my goddaughter, you know, in LA, going out. I have other friends, and I hear the backlash, and I've seen some of the video of how the police are behaving. When I grew up, the police were your friends, and it was not like that. It's turned into such another kind of movement now, because now they're talking about defunding the police, breaking up the police department. And I have always said, which you know, there are 3 groups in a country that have to be taken care of. It's the healthcare workers, it's the teachers, and it's the security of the police. And taken care of properly, because they're the ones who protect us. What happens if you defund the police? Then who looks after you? It has opened really like a Pandora's box, in my opinion, but it's very good, because these are issues we have to deal with. Now, we actually don't deal with it in Romania because it's not so prevalent. But open the news and watch CNN every day, and you'll see more and more coming out.
Where there's a line of logic is that there is, I was looking over, where are these violent, not just property damage, but people being killed accidentally, or things getting out of hand, etc. And rubber bullets are rubber bullets, but when it hits your eye, you can be blinded for life.
The girl was blinded for life.
Yes, I saw today on the news the interview that she gave. The issue that perhaps will lose the momentum, and there is goodness in this momentum, is that we start turning back and burning the history books. Right now, just in this week, we're getting off target so much. I prefer the dialogue, and I've been a debater on for decades and decades. Solve the problem as best you can now, or this will continue. It will become worse. Anarchy.
No, it's going to get worse, because I think we're at a point now, and that's why I mentioned all the other factors that have led to this, the being inside, the unemployment, all of that. It's like a powder keg and it exploded.
And to have this right now with the, again, couldn't be a worse time to have demonstrators who are taking off their masks. Why are they taking off their masks? They're endangering their safety because the virus still remains. So their outrage could splash back by these idiots who know they have coronavirus. They've been tested positive, and they're participating in demonstrations. This is criminal as far as I'm concerned. Forget their civil rights. What about the human rights of the demonstrators joining arms with them? But to not forget how we can handle the problem. I sent a letter both to President Trump and to my dear friend Nancy Pelosi about having a domestic Marshall Plan, because the more people are desperate about their jobs, the more they're going to feel such a bitterness and outrage about what is happening. If we use a Marshall Plan, and by the way, this is an idea that I want to, Mr. Brady of Operation Hope is now talking about that also, that after World War II, and President Trump is calling himself a wartime president with the virus, let him also be a wartime president post-war, like Roosevelt and Truman were, to have a Marshall Plan, not for the reconstruction of Europe, but the salvation of the middle class and lower middle class that couldn't stay away from their jobs.
Basically.
Yes. And
because America, is like about to, it's exploding. And
the defunding would be a license for anarchy. Because there aren't just passionate people who have lived through racism. They're not just good liberal individuals of all color who are joining forces. There are possible enemies of America that are funding this. This is an argument we mustn't forget. I say fund, not defund, those programs that are dealing with crowd control, that deal with arrest, to find the illegality immediately of chokehold and neck hold. You see the astonishment that I had that now there are demonstrations against the violence in England. I have never met a more docile, well-trained police force. Yes, of course, they do have guns nowadays, but the coppers before,
the Bobbies had
used to have,
the
yes, I think it was just the Billy Club, all they had. Now times have changed, but they are very, very well trained. America needs to fund those programs in the police academy, etc. And we as a society have to see the stark reality, and that is 20 years ago, 17 years ago, there was a very interesting poll, and it was for school children, high schoolers and youngsters who, in a moment of panic and mommy and daddy are not there, who do you call? Number one was the police.
That's what I was talking
Now, the 17 years later, it's number 17. Okay. I mean, you have everything but, and this constant propaganda in Hollywood about who's the drug dealer, who's the money behind the brothels and so on. In films, it's the police chief. We're absolutely causing fear in our children. However, if you have a class of people who are so wanting to serve society, their pay internationally is lousy because they're risking their life. When it was the huge epidemic with HIV and AIDS, many of them were bitten or spit at by scared people who had AIDS and who were afraid of going into the prison system, let's say, and did terrible things to the police, causing blood.
Oh my God.
So I remember I'm a San Franciscan. I knew this. I was on Reagan. I was one of the commissions federally, was the Human Rights Commission. So we saw the underbelly of this. But at least these men and women had respect. Now, to take away respect and also the paintbrush of I think it was in Atlanta, the police chief and also this incredible woman who's the mayor of Atlanta had said, my message to you, go home to the demonstrators. We will handle the situation. Bravo to her.
And they did.
Yes, because she was not forgetting the virus. Now, people are not talking about it that much. We need to remember, with the demonstrations, with people taking off their, why would you ever take off your mask in a demonstration? But that's what's happening. We're going to have a second wave, which is even more virulent.
That was one of my concerns.
Yes.
Is that, you know what, because everybody is so close, and that's how almost the virus was then superseded by the outrage.
Mm-hmm. And
my
I'm going to give you
was that, oh my God, everyone is, you know, as it's hard because I'm sitting here watching it, and I feel so helpless. But you know, I'm watching every day, and I'm praying for the people, and you're like, okay, how can we help them? And also talking about it, because people need to know about it. Very few people actually want to discuss it. It was funny because I wanted to tell you, when I mentioned you were coming on the show, they asked me, is she Democratic or is she Republican? And I said, I think she's both, because she's done.
Well, I've worked in the Carter and the Reagan White House, and now I'll take just a few seconds to talk from the conservative side, which I lived as a child through the huge unemployment in Detroit when Japan outdid Detroit, the Motown city, with a better product, Lexus car. That, of course, was given all of the blueprints for the River Rouge factories and so on, was given after the war to the Japanese. So they had a huge advantage over the Americans. Mm-hmm. To the point, having seen a family without a breadwinner is a devastated family. Going on welfare is not a way out. It's a burden. It is a burden because it stems and it spreads to the other generations. But on my conservative side, I really say, what is happening? We now, in this week, I mean, how topical, bravo to you again, that we're looking at vandalism that is not about getting food for your family and trying to get some kitchen equipment that you couldn't afford. That happened in Los Angeles, happened in Detroit, in other cities, This is vandalism senseless.
Absolutely.
One thing that I have to at least say, well, I'm not here to judge, to take down the statues of slavers. That's one thing. But where do we draw the line? Because it's one thing to throw into the river near Bristol a well-known slaver. It's one thing to have Lord Sainsbury fight back because his store is being boycotted, his chain of markets is being boycotted because of some of the suppliers, let's say. But when we go after Churchill, please tell me, what racism sin had he committed? I listened to one of the fellows who was doing graffiti, racist, and he was interviewed, and he said, well, he fought the Nazis, but he didn't fight them for the black man. I'm sorry, if we keep on looking 70 years, 100 years, and forget about 100 days and 70 minutes from now, we're getting into an argument that we can't win. Where do we draw the line? Are we going to change Nancy Pelosi, someone I admire very much and is a buddy? She has introduced a bill for the Senate and the House of Representatives to take down the statues in Congress of those leaders who were in the Confederacy. Where do you draw the line? Do you draw the line at Robert E. Lee? I think the fact that Arlington Cemetery is in his backyard is punishment is punishment sufficiently. Yet, where do we draw the line? Do we take down the name of Jefferson Memorial because Jefferson had a black slave as his mistress for the majority of his time serving his country? Where do we draw the line on Nelson? Nelson was a slaver. He was in the Caribbean before he made military history with Trafalgar and the dedication he had to the British Empire. But if you know your history, yes, that was a paragraph in his history. He was a captain of a slaver ship because he was serving his country before they had the consciousness later of the abolitionist. What we need to either do is in the Me Too movement, I was troubled when an exhibition in Paris was sidelined after everything was funded because of two voices saying Gauguin was a child molester. Now, he was in the Polynesian islands. He did marry. He left his family. I mean, he was a cad. He had been a banker. But he found his calling, and some of the most poignant portraits were of mistresses or wives that were children, 14, 16 years old. Do we hold today's outrage and high standards against generations, thousands of years? I'm not judging. I'm only saying we must be careful because we will lose an audience of individuals who are the majority of people who don't care. They want their family to be taken care of. They want food to be on their table. They want a job. And now they're being awakened about what's happening today. And their thoughts are,
you asked the question.
I want peaceful demonstrations. And then they applaud it.
You asked the question. I'm going to talk about that for a little bit. You said, where does it end and where are we going? Now, I read every day about what's going on in Hollywood because it's interesting for me and I have connections there. Few things have happened. So, few people have been knocked off a show because of their comments on Twitter and their racist comments, and they are now checking everybody from the background. Okay. Cop shows are being looked at differently because, again, usually who's the antagonist and who, you know, their whole focus is changing.
This is propaganda.
But it's the reality of it.
Yes, yes.
It's how it's portrayed. Mm-hmm. And it is an issue that has to be addressed. I wanted to mention something that has to do with this, but that I was reading something the other day about Tyler Perry. Now, this is a gentleman that started with nothing and built up, and he has made a huge series of studios in Georgia. And I say really hats off because I was very impressed how he did it. He took, and I can't speak on his behalf, but, you know, all that he had, and it didn't turn it, it's not rage, he built, he created, you know, a locale that they feel comfortable in. Whoever wants to come film there, he's named each stage after somebody very well known in the community. And you know what? I see and I feel the anger, and I didn't know if you've ever experienced racism. I've experienced it, so I know what it's like, which you probably didn't know. I've been through certain things where, you know, people have said things, people have, where are you born, what did you do, what's this and that. It's a position that they put you in that makes you feel very uncomfortable. Now, if somebody's never experienced that, they have no idea what you're talking about. Until you've lived it, and you get defensive, and then you sit and think, why am I being so defensive? Because you feel like somebody's putting your back up against the wall. And I'm a very bad person to do that with because, you know, I react like this. I'm not just going to sit quietly and take it. So this is something that is close to me, and I watch and I hate to see an injustice somewhere. I will get nuts. all right? And you're saying, how far do we go? We go until they, you know, the issue is addressed. They have to, body cams without a question. There have to be rules, and they have to be respected, and you cannot just do whatever you want. Shoving people, this is unacceptable. The moral code, what happened to the moral code, people? It's not, there should be a police code and a different code for the people. Even here, there's a code for we have to wear the masks and that, and I watch them all sitting there with nothing and tapping each other and saying hello. No, the rules apply to everybody.
No
Good
one
cop,
is
bad
above.
cop. And
Yes.
I knew sheriffs when I lived in LA. You know, decent, upstanding people. Yes, you always have a few that might create trouble. You need to move them out. So what happened now with the two gentlemen?
Self-policing. Self-policing.
No, what I'm afraid then is
the...
not self-policing. It's going to then turn into, as you said, some kind of anarchy, because people are going to get so fed up and they're going to say, you know what they said? No, we're not calling the police. We call a neighbor. Even to call somebody, they don't want to call the police. They'll call a friend, because you don't want to have that interaction that somebody will come for some innocent minor violation of whatever rule. It then turns in, look at what happened. It's frightening.
When you asked, have I ever experienced racism, I think because the Romanian stereotype, you don't know what we are, actually. Yes, I've been mistaken and felt the sting of racism, because with a name like Leah, everybody thinks I'm a Jewess, and I enjoyed the fact of simply saying, so, what is your problem with me? Well, you know, we like you because of this and that and so on, but you're too Jewish. And I said, I'm not going to continue this conversation. First of all, yes, I know my Old Testament. Yes, I have not just a few friends. I have many friends who are Jewish. And who are you to brand me? And if I were Jewish, I would shout to the top of the synagogue. How dare you? But I've also been accused, I'll let there be some levity here. I was asked by the Reagan administration to go to Ethiopia. And one of the people who I bumped into and was part of this delegation was Reverend Jesse Jackson's wife, Jackie, who is a wonderful, gutsy lady. And she was part of it. And we had to investigate why there were so many delays of food, tons of food, rotting on the wharf, while the Russian ships with guns and uniforms to break the rebel cause in Eritrea were getting to the top of the line. It was to crush the rebellion, let's say. But when we had the first night, and it was a huge banquet, and I finally said, you know, tomorrow morning we are going to go in a Hercules C-130. I don't feel right having 14 courses of food. Thank you for your hospitality. And yes, I'll have a little bit of this delicious national dishes, but not too much, because we were going to the camps where there were thousands of people, and triage, because of the starvation and lack of medicines. My point is I was, I didn't feel, I thought I'm imagining this, but the then Minister of Culture was giving me a little bit too much attention. And he said, how is it that you're married to, you know, a white man? And I said, yes, he's white. Well, what is this about a mixed marriage? And I said, you mean because I'm much younger than my husband? Yes, we're a mixed marriage. He's a man, I'm a woman. And then he said, but aren't you high yeller? which any of your Romanian fan group, that is someone who can pass for white. And it's a term from Texas, let's say. And he thought I was black. He thought I was black. And literally I said, no, I'm not, but if you read my CV, I've done many black causes. I've been on boards, etc., etc. But is this a problem now? So from being a pretty black woman, I became the devil, the white she-devil, if you will. So
he
racism.
Probably sorry, he didn't know how to deal with it.
Yeah. Oh no.
Oh, that
he
must have
changed
been
places.
a challenge. That was a challenge for him.
Yeah. Well, all right.
For sure,
all
that
right.
was a challenge for him.
But no, your questions are quite succinct. What is? I'm also puzzled. Why are people who mean well being crucified by the press for wanting to verbalize their frustration?
Because they're not.
Ellen
we don't know how to say
DeGeneres.
it. We don't know how to say it. That's the problem.
Well, then forgive. She's
saying.
She's trying.
And then maybe I will be crucified for the way I'm saying it. It's everybody wants to help. It's humanity, okay? We're all human beings. Everybody has to get along. Doesn't matter where you're from, where you grew up. None of that,
If we want this to succeed, we have to embrace everyone who wants to be peaceful demonstrators and not just talk. Yes, bravo to Jordan for giving $100 million to help the movement and to have a correct closure. But you'll have stars who make a wonderful salary, and they're giving big money, serious money, and it's, well, poo-poo. They can afford much more. Let them have the first step. Let them have their moment of saying, at least I did something. Bravo to them.
I'm so happy that we can have this dialogue, because it's overdue, okay? And this is, I'm very lucky that I have an audience that is more international, and also the Romanian audience, but not only here, because I know people will watch this in Canada and in England and in the US and in Australia. And you see what's going on all over, because it started out with one thing, and why are all the other countries demonstrating?
Well, do you know the common
connect
thread?
The dots, it's all based on the same factor, okay? It's all about racism. It's all about, we don't think like you do, we don't look like you do, we don't behave like you do. Anything, and I talk about this in another context, that in, let's say, business, you do something different, people look at it. You behave differently and you say, I want to do like this, you're looked at different. I know what it is when you're treated differently, you're looked at differently. But that's how you break the mold, because we want everyone to get along, but the uniqueness is what makes the people special. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yes, and also the fact that in the common thread is that so many of the violent demonstrations are with former imperialistic countries that had colonies. And you get Leopold II, King Leopold II of Belgium's statue was pulled down. And I also was not aware, a dear friend who is a naval officer, Belgian, said tens of millions of Congolese were...
They were killed in a sense.
Worked to death.
Worked to death. I read about
etc., etc. And I mean, it was stunning to hear that. I thought it was simply the raping of the minerals and the rubber and so on and so on.
Much worse.
No, it was. Now, did he make the order? No, but it was on his watch, let's say. The issue, and it made him extremely wealthy, to have the rubber resources, to have the grains and the diamonds and so on during the First World War, etc. What we're seeing is those countries that were colonies are standing up and saying, we want to be heard. If they only speak to themselves, if they push out leaders who are trying to learn, make up for past sins, even if they didn't do anything, but the generation before. I think I'll take a page out of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. When he allowed me to say, look, we can't just go to the choir and preach. We already have the Democrats who are wanting to have legislation, peaceful legislation on anti-apartheid. I mean, they've got to do it, and that's why we have the 17-city tour that I was honored to organize. But we hit every group. In every city, we went to the super rich, we went to the super conservative, and had a forum so that we would bring them on board. And because we had some of the top fundraisers and contributors to the Republican Party and to the Tea Party and to all of the conservative movements, because we had that almighty equalizer, the buck, the American buck, saying, I'm listening to Archbishop Tutu. I'm listening to some of these spokespersons who are friends of mine, and they are sold that if we continue this in Africa, we will see it spread into more and more violence. It was Tutu who used that incredible vision of bring in everyone, and by having his truth and compensation, where no one was jailed, no one was held to a press conference and burned in effigy. It was the victims and the people who had been in power who excessively abused that power.
I think you hit the nail on the head. This is all about excessive force.
Yes.
This is excessive everything, all right? To demonstrate or not to demonstrate, we are going to wrap this up with...
Demonstrate with masks. Demonstrate using common sense, and also realize if we don't, the very people who are the crusaders on this are going to get sick. This is the worst thing that can happen. But also, the good cops better be on talk shows pushing for funding, no chokeholds, no knee holds, a immediate halt and punishment for those post Floyd
They
era.
have to change it. They have to.
They can't make any more excuses.
Do you know, I want to tell you something. When I was very touched the other day. There was the pictures of the police officers kneeling. And a lot of this started, I don't know if you're all aware, like 4 years ago with Colin Kaepernick taking a knee. He's a very famous football player who, yes, I must mention has not been signed since, and which is a tragedy in my opinion. Okay, I don't agree with it. I think he made a statement. He said, I'm kneeling because of the injustice. It's not to do with the flag. It's not to do with that. And when I saw the police officers kneeling there, I thought, because that's their own way of expressing
and the police
themselves.
chief, the police
and
chief,
they're making their statement. Okay. Again, we need to work together. Everybody has to connect. You know, the world is in so much trouble already. The virus should have brought it home to everybody. And the only good thing that I can say that I think about it is the planet is breathing. And we've started to see that. And we realize, my goodness, you know, when everybody is at home and they're not all over the place, the planet's starting to breathe. But at what expense? Everybody's at home, unemployment shot up, businesses are closing left, right, and center. And then you have all these underlying issues. And then you have an explosive situation like that, poof. And it became too much. You know, I agree with you, demonstrate responsibly, but, you know, because the only way to change things, and I've always said that the government should be afraid of the people, not the people afraid of the government. Because the government is supposed to represent the people.
Yes.
Period.
And our peacekeepers, who are the good cops, the men and women who are again, coming home and their children are made fun of at school, etc., etc. These people have to be lauded because they are keeping society sane.
I would like to say thank you so much for sharing with us and helping us to understand, because it's been a very, I think, tense period for everybody. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. I want to thank you all for joining us and say good night, goodbye, and all the best. See you next week. Ciao.